I love telling the story of the mystery of Christmas with kids because they ask amazing and surprising questions. Questions my societally assimilated brain would have never come up with, or questions that are just different than the kinds of questions that I ask now. And I realize it's a pretty brave practice because questioning something that many take for granted can be really disorienting, and lots of people and institutions will resent you for it. But Christmas is a story of challenged assumptions after all. Still, one series of questions that came up in school chapel recently kind of threw me for a loop at first. I got asked, why wasn't God born as the donkey or a dog? Donkeys are cute and helpful, and everybody loves dogs. Perhaps we'd be better off with a fluffy God that goes in their crate at the end of the day. Or, they continued, at least why wasn't God surrounded by creatures more majestic, like lions or buffalo or elephants? Perhaps it would be more impressive if the birth of God looked more like the presentation of Simba at Pride Rock, and the heavenly hosts singing could sound a bit more like Elton John and the Circle of Life. And these were good questions, in my opinion, because they prompted more good questions. Why would it matter that God arrives as a human baby rather than a blue heron? Why does it matter that God is born among us, among day laborers and pull-out couches, rather than penthouses and pyrotechnics? I have years of theological training, so I feel pretty confident that I could come up with a robust cosmic reflection or philosophical meaning, even political implications, but I'm not sure how much all of that resonates with an 8-year-old that just wants to know if God is more like the family pet, or more like their cherished but often cantankerous little brother. I have a hunch that many of us would also like to know what this Emmanuel really has to do with us and the pile of presents we still have to wrap tonight, or the realities we will wake up to tomorrow. Who, how, why, and where is God, both within and beyond all the candles and choirs and cookie trays? This past summer, this congregation supported me on a women's trip to Israel and Palestine, where I got to walk through the alleyways of Jerusalem and the fields outside of Bethlehem. And we came to this hillside chapel that overlooks the green landscape where shepherds kept their watch by night. And they say that these are the same fields where Ruth, the widowed foreigner, once worked for just enough food to survive, and also where she may have met her long-lost kin in her own story of restoration and revival. But these fields look pretty much the same as many others I have seen in my lifetime, just dirt and shrubs like what I pass on the highway. These fields are still cultivated land, spitting distance from where Ruth's great, 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 on and on grandchild will now be born in this ever-on story of people trying to build a life and a world that puts food on the table and peace in our hearts. Something at once both mundane and transcendent. And tucked into the hills' ridges, there are caves that offered shelter for animals and people alike. Our guide told us that the shepherds would likely use them as a kind of natural corral, guiding the sheep into safety, and then would lay themselves down across the opening to guard and guide them there. Tonight, we marvel that their body, struggling to find comfort across the grit and grass, their mind likely drifting between attention and daydreaming, is the same as God's own, an alchemy of the fragile and holy. And after a time of looking out at this valley, we could actually go into the caves too, and there were narrow steps that led into a dark passageway, and that's really all you could see from the entrance. We didn't know how big it was or how closed in beyond that, so we let a few people go in trust, and we would wait for the rest of them to come back out, but they didn't. And so we waited, and we waited a bit longer, and still we saw no people and heard no sound, and we began to wonder if maybe there was some other exit to this cave that we couldn't see. We kept waiting and wondering, and finally, me, being the impatient and impetuous raccoon person that I am, I volunteered to go and see, with the promise to come back and tell everyone else what was up. So I went into the darkness through a tunnel of damp rock, and the air itself seemed so still in there, so quiet. And I crept a little further and a little further, winding around, not sure what to expect, but conscious that this is how many horror movies begin. And then I heard it, echoes of their voices long before I could see them. And at first, I could just make out the impact of sound waves on stone, but as I got closer, I heard more. The tiny hairs on the back of my neck and arms stood in attention. It wasn't just their voices muddled in conversation, but lifted in music. A resounding melody bouncing off every surface around me. Gloria. They were singing the song of angels. So I skipped back to the mouth of the cave and stuck my head out to everyone waiting there. They're not lost, I said. They're singing. Come on, there's room for all of us in there. And so we all went through, following one after the other, into the belly of the cave to add our untrained voices to the song. It felt like a small glimpse of what shepherds long ago might have known, of just going about their business, a disorienting stillness, and then the simultaneously fearful and wondrous delight of heavenly music. There among musty caves, still dressed in whatever clothes they'd been wearing all day, an invitation to come and see God, who looks just like their niece or nephew when they were born. The stories felt so close and so heavenly. But the song I heard wasn't angels. It was just Lauren and Rachel and Natalia. And that, to me, seems like Christmas. God comes to dwell in 10 fingers and 10 toes that will heal with tender touch, 10 fingers and toes that are also just as susceptible to getting jammed in a doorway, or drop something and sweep up the pieces from the ground, or develop arthritis over time. God, in God's very being, born a child, weaves together raw humanity and divine possibility. God arrives in surprising wonder and ordinary holiness. God comes to share in the fullness of our being. This is a night that draws us toward awe and wonder. The twinkling chandeliers, colorful flowers, boisterous horns draw together simple earthly elements and hope to offer us something of the transcendence we tell. Perhaps tonight, which is not so different from any other evening in December, the sun sets and the moon rises, but perhaps tonight the distance between heaven and earth might seem particularly thin. Perhaps on a night like that, gathered with trembling hearts, unpolished personalities, and uncertain futures, we are more likely to stare up at the stars, mingle with memories, and ask big existential questions, and find ourselves in holy company that lingers. Amen.